So if I'm thinking about teaching students new language for this age group, there's a couple of things I really like. One is Realia and the other is flashcards. What about you?
I love flashcards. I've got a collection on a CD-ROM that I use regularly with my young learners. Not only large flashcards, and not only coloured flashcards, because you can use flashcards for listen and draw activities if they're in black and white, but they're so versatile that you can use them in a lot of ways to present vocabulary, to practice vocabulary, to do TPR work, for example, listen and pick up, listen and show activities. I can't imagine teaching without using flashcards.
Is there other materials you use as well?
With the younger ones, I like to use puppets and masks, and the puppets don't have to be very elaborate. You can actually use little stick puppets, or you can paint things on your finger and they can do finger puppets and do little dialogue work. Kids love them. And you'll find that a lot of the younger kids will actually talk more because they're acting a little bit. And by acting, they're learning chunks of language as well for short dialogue work, and you can build on that.
I think for me as well, I really like songs and chants, because you can bring a lot of the language into songs and chants.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing is that we don't teach the children grammar, that we just teach them chunks of language. It's amazing actually how much grammar the children can learn through not being taught grammar, but through being taught through these chunks of language.
Exactly, and classroom language and useful expressions can be made more difficult. For example, can I have a book? Could you pass me the book? Can you pass me the book? You can actually have the same vocabulary, but you can change the exponent so that as the kids become more confident in using language, you can actually make the exponents more difficult.
So just thinking about, you get to that point when you want to present some language, what do you think you need to think about?
For me, finding a context for the language is important when you would use the language. Providing a clear model is also important when you're drilling. Expressions, for example, can I have a pencil, can I have a book? You've got a context there in the classroom, and then drilling the vocabulary or drilling the expression that you're using with them is important as well, and making sure that they are at ease with the pronunciation before going any further.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's really important to think of the children's learning styles as well. Some children will be happier learning in a more informal way. Some children might be happier if it's more formal, and also thinking about whether they learn visually or orally, or they like to touch and feel things. So I think it's very important that we think about different learning styles in the classroom. And I would say most classrooms have got a mixture of different learning styles, so you need to have a real range of activities to suit different.
No, I would agree with you there.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's important is if you're doing new language in the classroom, that you should use activities that you've done before with the children. And if you're recycling language, then you can try out new activities, because I think if you're doing new language and a new activity, it can often get quite confusing. So I think that's one thing to think about as well. So
I think because if you're using a chant with the young learners and you're changing the vocabulary but using the same rhythm and beat to the chant, that is joining something new vocabulary with something that they're more familiar with, and that will make it easier for them to assimilate any new vocabulary that you might be teaching them.
Okay, I think one other thing is that you have to make sure that children actually understand the concept, because sometimes in the course books there could be language used that is not relevant to the children. So if you're living, for example, in a landlocked country and there's a whole unit about being at the beach, it may not be relevant to your students.
Yeah. I think also you could check the language that you're teaching by asking simple concept questions. If you're teaching prepositions, for example, you can also say, is it on or is it under? And you can elicit the language from them. And as kids become older, you can also ask them concept questions which test to see if they actually understand the grammar. For example, he goes to school every day. Goes. Is he doing it now, or does he do it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? So you can ask questions like that and elicit the language or the concept from.
I think that
students.
comes into the sort of inductive approach,
Yeah.
where you give the children the language and then they can work out the rules.
Yeah.
I think if you're doing something like homework, then maybe you want to do more of a deductive approach, where you're actually telling the children exactly what you want them to look out for. But I think in the classroom it's nice to do a lot of elicitation and get the children working things out for themselves.
Yeah.
I think one thing we not mentioned, which is important as well, is that the language should be natural, because I think sometimes it depends on the kind of books and resources you're using, but I think I would always check that the language in there is something that's natural, and also natural for children of that age group. Sometimes the language can be a little bit too high level, so I think that's something important to watch out for.
The language should be natural, and they should also have opportunities to practice the new language, and preferably in pairs or small groups. And if you're using language, you can also control the language. For example, in an imposed dialogue, where you have got a short dialogue that you impose, you repeat with the children, line after line. You repeat, the children repeat, and then you ask them to perhaps think of the dialogue and try to memorize the dialogue, and then you practice it. So this is just one technique of getting them to repeat, but repeat longer texts in English.
Yeah, just one thing I was thinking about the natural language. One thing I've seen done in quite a few classrooms is that, for example, the teacher will say, "Have you got a pen?" And then the student will say, "Yes, I have got a pen." And actually, that's not natural. We wouldn't actually say, "Yes, I have got a pen." We wouldn't repeat that again. We would just say, "Yes, I have."
And pass the pen.
And pass the pen. So I think, when you're teaching, just keep that in the back of your mind. Is this natural language? And also, I think we mentioned before, is this the kind of topic that the students will find easy to talk about? When you're teaching your students, really think, will these students talk about this topic in their L1? And if the answer is no, then it's probably going to be quite difficult for you to spark an interest in in English.
You have to be careful with the topics, because what works well with a group of 6, 7, 8-year-olds won't necessarily work as well with a group of 11, 12, 13-year-olds in terms of topic. And a lot of the older students might find it childish. The younger students may find that it doesn't appeal to them, it's not relevant to their interests or their lives.